In the last couple of videos, we implemented a hard-coded hello world component and then a hello x component where x could be any value that the user has entered, right? Now let us take it a couple steps further. In this video, let us implement an account detail component. What that component would do is it would get the ID of the account in context, make a server call, get other account details, and display it somewhat nicely on the UI. Okay, and towards the end, we'll also throw in a button which will pop open the selected record in edit mode. Okay, um, let's create a new Lightning component like so, and let's call it account info. Okay, and let me create the Force app hostable interface and flexi page available for all page types interface by checking those checkboxes. Okay, the first aspect I would like to cover here is how to get the ID of the record in context. We already know what Force app hostable and flexi page available for all page types interfaces do. There is another interface called Force has record ID that you'll use quite often. Okay, if this interface is implemented, this Lightning component will automatically know the record ID of the record in context. That is, an attribute called record ID is implicitly created for you to use, meaning that you can directly use something like that as long as you are within the context of a record detail. Okay, notice that I did not create a aura attribute like that. Like that for this to work. Okay, this piece of code, this line is not needed. Okay, this is automatically created for us behind the scenes. So as long as I implement Force has record ID, I can use the record ID attribute which is implicitly created for me like so. Okay, and just like how there is Force has record ID, there is another interface called Force has s object name. Okay, when you specify this interface, you have the object API name, the type of the object in context available for you to use directly, and you could get it like so. Okay, let me save it and let me show you this component in action. Let's switch back to our account detail page. This is an account detail, and I know that because I'm looking at a particular record. Let me go ahead and edit this page and drop our account info. There's that account info component that we just created. Let me grab that and drop it right here, and let me just get rid of our hello world component now. Okay, close that, save it. There, that is the ID of the record in context, and that is the name of the object that we are looking at, which is an account object. Okay, please keep in mind that these attribute names are case sensitive. Okay, Lightning is XML and JavaScript based, so by default almost everything that you see or work with in Lightning is case sensitive. Okay, so something like this will not work. Okay, it needs to be record ID in that case and not this. Okay, let me put a couple breaks here. Okay, the next aspect is how to make a server call. Okay, so for that, let us first create our Apex controller. Let me go to File, New, Apex class, and let us call our class account Apex controller. Okay, and in here we're going to specify a method that accepts um, an account ID, and it returns the account details via a SOQL query. Okay, um, public get account info, right? And it takes string ID, or let's just do ID account ID, and then it will return a SOQL. Okay, select ID, name, industry, website, type, phone, I think is also available, from account where ID equals our account ID that we are passing in. Okay. All right. So there are a couple things that we are missing. The return type for this method would be of type account, right? And two other things that you should keep in mind is, for this method to work within the context of Lightning, you need to have the Aura enabled annotation. Okay, this is required for this to work with Lightning components. All methods that work with Lightning need to be static. Okay, so make sure your method is static, and make sure that you have specified Aura enabled, and then you have this method ready for Lightning consumption. Okay, let me save it. And now that we have this controller ready, we could tie our component. Let me go here, and we can tie our component to that controller by specifying controller like that. Okay, so this particular component is implementing force hasRecordId. It has force has as object name, and the controller that this component uses is account Apex controller. Makes sense, right? All right. Now let us create our JavaScript method in controller.js that will eventually invoke our server-side action. Okay, let's click on the controller section, and a first method is automatically created for you, and let me call it fetch account info. Okay, something to keep in mind here: the name of your JavaScript method cannot be the same as your Apex method. Okay, in Apex, remember that we named our method get account info, and here in controller.js I'm calling it fetch account info. Okay, the JS method will fail to work if there is a conflicting Apex method with the same name. Okay, however, you can have the same method names within controller.js and helper.js. As long as you're within the JS territory, you are free to use the same names. How? Let me show you. So I could do helper dot fetch account info and pass in component event and helper. Okay, and notice that I did not yet create this helper method. Helper methods, I was previously mentioning that this helper parameter is a reference to this helper section, so you will be able to invoke a helper method as long as um, um, you have specified that method in that helper section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this fetch account info helper method as well. Okay, let me go click on that helper section, and I'm going to call it the same fetch account info for no reason. It doesn't have to be the same. I'm just choosing to keep it same at this point. Okay, um, and the same inputs. Okay, uh, so fetch account info at the helper level, and for testing purposes let me just do something like an alert, and let me just say implement server side action here. All right, and let me save it, and let me go back to my controller.js, and now that I have a helper method called the same ready, I'm free to save this as well. And notice that my controller.js method is doing nothing other than delegating to the helper method. Why? Because we are going to create a server-side action, and it is recommended to keep such business logic within helper. Okay, why? Because the code defined within the helper section is shared across multiple similar components, so this way your code is architecturally more efficient. Okay, okay. So we have a controller method that invokes a helper method, and in the helper method all we're doing is showing an alert for now. Okay, the server side logic will go here eventually. Okay, um, but but notice that there is no way our fetch account info method is being invoked from the component so far. This cannot be done via a button because the information, the account information, account detail, needs to be shown as soon as the page loads, right? So for such situations, there is a system event called init, which fires on component load, which would be the ideal way to initialize our attributes. Okay, and the way that works is like so. You specify aura handler. Okay, and then the name is going to be init. Okay, and the value is going to be this, like that. Okay, and then action would be um, our controller action, c dot what, fetch account info. Okay, so what does this mean? Let's revisit this line because this is probably one of the most popular line that you'll be writing in your component. So let's try to understand this better. So aura handler is handling an event. In this case, it is a init event, which is a system event. And what are you passing to that event? This, which is this particular component. So you're initializing this component by calling in that particular action, and this action is your controller.js method, which we have defined here. Okay, all right, so now let us, oh, we've saved it all. Okay, so now let us go ahead and refresh this page, and what should happen? There, implement server-side action here. It's an alert that we've created in our helper.js, which was called from controller.js, and controller.js was called from the init event. Okay, good. So now let us go back to our component and actually implement the server call. And where is that defined? In the helper section. Okay, right here. Let me comment this piece out, and let me remove that line, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is capture the ID of the record in context in controller.js. How would I do that? Let me declare a JavaScript variable called record ID, and like I mentioned before, record ID is automatically available for you because we are implementing force has record ID, right? Because that attribute is available for us implicitly, I can do component.get to get the value of an attribute called record ID, and do not forget to prefix it with v dot. So my attribute called record ID, I'm getting it from the component and I'm assigning it to record ID JavaScript variable. Okay, and remember that we've already tied our component with account Apex controller, the one that has the actual method that returns account details, right? So the way to invoke a server-side action is like so. Let us create something called as a action JavaScript variable and do component.get, and this time we're gonna call a method c.getAccountInfo. Okay, and what is c dot means that it is a method, and in this case it is a method not in controller.js or helper.js, but this is going to be a method in our Apex class, and we called it getAccountInfo. This component knows that this method exists because we have included this particular controller in our markup. Okay, so this method is visible for this component for it to use. Okay, and then notice that our Apex method accepts input parameters, right? So the way you specify input parameters is like so: action dot set params. Okay, and set params accepts JSON object, which would be like that. Okay, in there you would specify the account ID, which is that the name of the actual parameter that is being accepted, and then pass in the actual value from our JavaScript. Okay, so we know the record ID is captured in the record ID variable. That variable you're assigning that value, you're assigning it to the account ID input parameter, and then this is then passed to our getAccountInfo Apex controller method. Okay, all right, good. Now we have declared our Apex method. We have set the parameters for our Apex method, and now what we're going to do is we're going to implement something called as a callback. Okay, what this does is it implements a particular logic after your server call has returned to this component. Your server call is first executed, and then after that execution, it will implement this callback method like so. I'm going to do a response, okay, and do that. Okay. So what are we doing? Again, after your server controller returns after execution, it is going to invoke this particular function that we are defining, that we're going to define here for this particular component. Okay, and I know that response will contain a variable called a method called getState. So let me capture the state, whether the server-side action was successful or was it did it return an error. So where state is response dot getState. Okay, and if state is success, okay, then what do I want to do? No. If state is success, then I can capture the result of the successful operation like so. Okay, these are a couple things that you need to keep in mind. The state is returned by response.get state, and this response is also, it could be anything. You could call it R or a res or whatever, whatever you accept here for your callback function. That is what you use. And dot get state is the method that returns the state of the server side action, and dot get return value will return you the actual um, returned value. In this case, it is the account with the actual account details. It's all returned via that and is captured in a JavaScript variable. We are calling that result. Okay, now we have the result here, but there is no, we have not yet created a attribute for us to capture this particular result on the markup side. So let me create a aura attribute here, call it um, record. Okay, and the type is gonna be what? Account. All right, good. The type supports any standard Apex types, including as objects. So this is valid. So this is an account called record. And now that we have this attribute ready, we can do component.set. What are we setting? v.record with our result. Make sense? And then let us do some error handling a little bit. If the state is success, then only get the value and assign it to a record. Otherwise, what I'm gonna say is just pop in an alert with the state. Okay, not gonna do any error handling at this point, but just gonna um, show a pop-up message if there is an error. Okay, and after this is complete, do not forget to enqueue the action that we defined above by using $a enqueue action method. Okay, so any server calls that you make in Lightning, they're all asynchronous. Okay, you are queuing this particular action that we defined here. Okay, for Lightning to execute it whenever the resources are available. Okay, and let me save it. Now that we have the record value populated with the result from the server, what we can do now is, in addition to these values that are being displayed on the component, I can also now do v.record dot name. Okay, and then let me do a vr, and let me also show you v.record dot website. Okay, now save it and refresh it. Watch what happens. There, that is the name of this particular account and its website. We could also throw in the other fields that we are getting from the Apex controller: ID, name, industry, website, type, and phone. But there. So let me do a full recap. We first implemented force hasRecordId, force has s object name, and remember that once you implement these, an implicit variable called record id and s object name, they are implicitly declared for you behind the scenes. You don't have to manually put in this particular or attribute. No harm is done even if you include it. If it is there on the component, the system will still populate that attribute with the value that you get from the context. But even if not, you can still go ahead and use it in your component like so. Okay, and then we created a controller, and we declared a method called getAccountInfo, which accepts account ID as input and returns the account details via a SQL query. And this method should be static, and it has to have the @aura enabled annotation specified for it to work with Lightning. And then we created a couple methods in our controller.js and helper.js. Um, in controller.js, all we're doing is we are delegating our method to helper.js because this is business logic, it's server-side call. It is efficient to include such logic in helper.js. And remember that the name that you give to your controller.js should be different than the name that you have in your Apex code. Cannot be the same. But the name that exists in controller.js can repeat in your helper.js. Okay, and notice that I use the same method name here, and then in helper we created we implemented the actual server-side call. We captured the record ID by using component.get v.recordId, and then we defined our action get account info, which is your controllers Apex controller action, and then you set parameters using action.set params. Okay, account ID is precisely that. And then we are passing in the captured record ID as the account ID, and then in a callback we're getting the state of the callback. No, we're getting the state of the server action result. If it was successful, we are getting the return value and capturing it, and then we're setting a attribute called v.record, which is of account type with the returned result. Otherwise we're showing a alert, and also the action needs to be enqueued for it to work. If you do not implement this this piece of code, then no action will be called. Like there won't be a server action at all. Okay, and then once all of this is implemented, the record is populated with the account details from the server, and you can display that information like so: v.record.name, v.record.website. Okay, and the end result looks something like that. Okay, this is somewhat ugly, right? So let us now try to style this a little bit. Okay, for that, what I'm gonna use is let us go back to our Lightning component library um, and and look up something called as a lightning card. Okay, lightning card. Take that, and this is how it looks. Okay, there's going to be a title, there's going to be a card body, there's a card footer, and then space for some buttons down the road. Okay, let me grab the implementation and paste it right under here. All right, okay, so let's review this. Footer is going to be it says it's hard coded as card footer, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the website name, which is v.record.website, and I'm going to paste it in the footer. Okay, and the title says hello. Instead of that, I'm going to take the record name and paste it, replace the hello with it. Okay, and here are some actions. Let me comment this out for now. We'll revisit that in a couple minutes. Let me comment that out. And then in the body, let us include well, let us include the other fields that we have? Type, right? And then what else? Record industry, right? And then v.recordId.phone, perhaps, right? And then let me prefix these with type industry with the actual field labels, and then phone. Okay, and save it. And let me comment this piece of code as well. We don't need to see the subject name and record ID anymore. I'm only going to see the lightning card footer with footer, a title, and a body. Okay, and now let's refresh our component and see how it looks. There, the website there, the name of the record right there, and body. Somewhat nicer, right? Okay. The next piece that I wanted to talk about is implementing a button at this record level, clicking on which you will be able to open the selected record in edit mode, the full record in edit mode. And for that, let us go back to our component and uncomment this piece of code. Okay, and let us save it and go back, refresh, watch what happens. There, that new button is a result of us including a lightning button in the action section of our lightning card. Okay, instead of this, let me just go back here and look for say brand action or success. Let's pick success, the green colored button. So I'll take this guy. Okay, and I'll paste it here. Okay, so variant is success, label is gonna be edit, title is gonna be edit, and on click, instead of calling it handle click, I'm gonna call it edit record. Okay, and remember C dot invokes is required to invoke a controller side action. And in my controller, I'm going to go to my controller, and I'm going to implement the record edit method. And the way you specify more than one component is by specifying a comma there, and here I'm going to say record edit like that. Okay, and function, and the function will take component, event, and helper, the triumvirate. And then in here, I'm going to capture the record ID again. It is component.get v.recordId, like that, right? And then I am going to use some system lightning ready-made events which would open a record in edit mode. Okay, and that is that could be done by $a. This is the aura namespace, .get. Okay, in here it is going to be e dot. E is the event. Force edit record. Okay, this is the event that is responsible for opening a record in edit mode and is provided by the aura namespace by default, a ready-made event. And let me call it var edit record event. Okay, and I can set parameters to this particular event by saying set params. Okay, edit record event dot set params, and then this accepts a JSON object as um, input, and then here it accepts. I know that it accepts record ID, and for that I'm going to pass in the record ID, which is our JavaScript variable. Okay, so this event, this is a system event which I know exists. This comes to you out of experience. So I suggest you look up some ready-made system provided uh, events like this in the future, and then you implement that and you specify parameters. It accepts one parameter called record ID, and I'm passing the record ID as component from the component, and then after this is set, I'm going to fire my edit record event like so. An event is fired using the dot fire method. Okay, and let me save it. So what did we just do? We created a button at the component level, okay, called edit. In the on click, we specified c.edit record, which is the name of the controller method that we have defined in the controller edit record. And in there, we're capturing the record ID, and then we're implementing a system provided event called force edit record. And the way you can invoke it is by specifying that e dot and then eventually setting the parameters and using the dot fire method. Okay, let's go ahead and refresh our page. And there, the green color is because it's a variant success and it's called edit. And when you click on it, there, the entire Burlington Textiles Corp of America record in edit mode. Okay.